This video will be a non-expert opinion on forensics for a specific gun, a specific situation, and a specific cartridge. Because of lack of information, I can't claim to have an expert opinion, and also because specific firearm being mentioned, or is it really the specific firearm? It isn't. Is not one that I am completely familiar with. And finding easy answers for it quickly is what I do because I'm lazy, and also because if you find it quickly, especially from the manufacturer website, then that means nobody's really going to argue with you about what your conclusions are. The lack of information bothers me. I find it disturbing. Can marks on an unfired cartridge lead only to one person's one gun and one markings left by it based on marks? Unfired versus fired rounds in a chamber. Striations from the chamber. Extractor marks. Ejector marks. The ejection port. The magazine. The breech face. The firing pin, whether it's been used or not. All can leave scratches, impressions, or chemical residue, or patterns of such. Together or separately, these can lead to an individual stack of characteristics, or just one characteristic, that could point to a cartridge coming exclusively from one gun. Is that true? And the answer is it really depends on whether or not someone is being very strict about how they collect this information and the conditions being revealed about the materials. In a normal occurrence, we're going to use a 9mm high point. This is my favorite example of gun you do not want to use if you want to be untraceable, versus the same gun made untraceable. Here we go. Traceability is based on being able to find something at the scene that leads to something else. Unless the firearm you're holding has been used in such a way that there is evidence of its usage after a criminal act occurs, you do not throw away or sell the firearm. You grind it up. In many cases, for instance, with a Glock and many other modern firearms, you take it completely apart, down to the pins and parts, pull every part apart. For instance, in a Glock, metal and plastic are merged together, break them apart, then grind up all of the parts, and then anything that burns, burn it, anything that melts, melt it at the temperature it melts at, everything else, grind it up, and then throw all the pieces in separate locations. But no, that's literally what you do. If the only thing that connects you to a criminal act is a gun, is that gun worth going to prison for life? Your clothing you wore that day, shred it. Shave your face. Wear clothing only that's completely different for the rest of your life. Don't care if you have to dress up like a clown, you don't look that way anymore. There are literally a million things you could do to make it to where you're not trackable. Buffoonery, stupidity, or the presumption that the public has that people are twisting their little snidely whiplash mustache and being in plain sight because it's thrilling is not unfounded. There are a small number of people who have done something terrible that went out of their way to make it really obvious that they were an extremely obvious suspect. And there's a bunch of people who just do stupid things that have the same effect. Retaining a firearm from 2017 is not one of them because of something simple. You can sell off the magazine that might have left a mark on the cartridge. You can remove the barrel of virtually all semi-automatic, or what is more appropriately called auto-reloading firearms, and just get another barrel. You can remove the extractor, which is a claw-shaped item in many of these guns, that hits the back of the cartridge. We're going to say this is the back rim of a cartridge. Goes click, grabs the back, and then it has the ability to extract the cartridge from the chamber. The chamber is integral to the barrel. If you change the barrel and the extractor claw, you're now down to only a few other parts. The breech face of the gun, or the bolt, that's the part that presses the cartridge in and shoves it into the chamber in the first place. It has a breech face and a little push rod built into it, along with hanging onto the cartridge with that extractor. The ejector rod is a push pin that makes it to where it pirouettes as it's extracted in some guns, not all of them. And then the firing pin. I've already done a video on firing pins having micro traceability in them by you just buying a new one. The breech face in some of these, again, can be traded out. The part is actually a removable part. Virtually all of the parts in a gun, the serial number is only applied to the fucking handle and the body you put the parts in. Almost all of these parts can be traded out. Or just destroy it. Save your brass. Never leave brass behind. Never. I can go to a shooting range, grab brass from somebody who just fired. Keep the place clean. I'm the nice guy who goes around. I'm the FUD. Yeah, but I might be some evil criminal who's selling empty brass with specific patterns on it so that people can make sure you get blamed. But if they fire it from a gun, won't that leave marks from the other gun? Guess what? There's an entire market of, and I'm going to bring it up, high points. High points are made very rough, so they have lots of marks they leave on cartridges and on your hands. But if you simply accurize them or clean them up and make them dead perfect polished, suddenly they're high accuracy long-range shooting pistols by some people's estimates. But more importantly, they don't have any ballistic marks on the cartridges. Even an ejected cartridge, none. They make it to where when the cartridge is put in, the bullet doesn't touch the rifling. No lands or grooves to chase. The chamber is buttery smooth. It leaves no marks. The extractor and ejectors are perfectly mirror finish polished and then rounded on the edges to where they won't leave a gouge mark. They leave a drag mark that's very smooth. It's barely noticeable. There's even a market for making the breech faces not flat, but have an impression permanently bashed into them of a cartridge. So when you put the cartridge in, the only impression it's going to get is from an idealized cartridge with no marks. There's even a market for selling deliberately heavily fired cartridges that are now work hardened that don't have marks on them. They just remill the surface slightly to where that they have no marks microscopically, and they're hardened. There's also coatings that come with the cartridges when you buy them that make it to where on the first firing, they sometimes don't leave any marks. Simply buying a $100 upgrade barrel with integral chamber and no lands or grooves touching the bullet, and buying an idealized, accurized, or optimized extractor and ejector pin, the ejector pin and the extractor claw for these sometimes can be bought, for around $200 that are made ultra smooth and perfectly machined to go into your gun as a sign of high quality and workmanship. They also have a habit of not leaving any traceable ballistics of any kind on them. There's nothing forensically to check. And again, if you fire a cartridge enough times and reseat it and rerun it through the die with the die lube, it ends up being nearly mirror finished. People will polish them in a tumbler. This also work hardens them if you use the hard material. The hard material is ball bearings. By impact, it hardens the metal to where it no longer has the ability to get marks in some cases. Not always, but if you do all of these stages and also, again, do the breech face and firing pins in such a way that there's nothing left behind except an indentation on the cartridge, period, that's it, and make it to where it has no drag mark because you just make sure the gun works perfectly. The reason this is done is so that you don't have feeding issues, preventing the gun from jamming. Again, high points made to where they won't jam and they run perfectly. Race guns that are designed that way, or people just buying used cartridge touching components, buy a used barrel, buy used extractors, etc. They carry other characteristics, but half the time it's all blended out. The idea that a person would commit a murder in 2017, even if it didn't involve firing the gun, and not just get rid of it, or change out all the parts and then get rid of it, or, there's a million combinations here. I want to point out one of the things about cartridges being made is they're often left with a thin coating of volatile organic compounds from the packaging and also from the lube that was used to put the parts together and various materials and gases and nasty materials that were exposed to the cartridges, that it has the habit of making the cartridge, even if it sits there for years in a park, not corrode, so it looks brand new and shiny. Should also point out that the 40 Smith & Wesson round has a habit of being sold mentioning whether or not it has any metal attracting, magnet attracting metals in it. It might not have iron for the anvil. Some of the cartridges are sold with a brass anvil and a copper or brass primer cup, which means they don't have any magnet reactions at all. You won't pick it up with a metal detector unless it detects paramagnetic fields. Guess what cartridge gets found more easily? The shiny pretty one or the steel one that's been stomped into the ground by accident? It's that joke about, I'm looking under the light over here in the parking lot to find my keys. Oh, where'd you lose them? Oh, a mile down the road, but there's a light here and I have an opportunity of finding something. That's often how it works at a crime scene. Can the marks on an unfired .40 Smith & Wesson lead to only one person's one gun based on ejector or extractor marks, the chambering, the magazine, the breech face? Yes. All of them together specifically, except next layer. Every company that wants to be taken seriously making firearms makes them so close to identical that entire runs of the parts, all the parts for a gun, for a period of months, maybe even a full year, will have identical peculiarities to them. They're indistinguishable. Glocks are notorious for having a barrel that fires a bullet with almost no rifling because they don't use traditional rifling. They use a polygonal shape. Basically, it's a different type of rifling, and it leaves almost no mark. Some guns are altered or born with a sort of a choke on the end that wipes the rifling because they're trying to get one extra little bit of 50 feet per second out of the barrel, because every foot per second counts, by squeeze boring it, which has the effect of wiping off the bullet. And again, people can just use the guns enough that it polishes away all of this. A gun that someone bought, maybe used in 2001, that might have been with them in 2017, that wasn't fired enough up to that point, and since then, that has exactly the same characteristics. How many? Is it from all these different parts? The ejector, the claw for the extractor, the breech face, the firing pin, the chamber, the drag mark as the cartridge is pulled out of the chamber, swiping on only one side. Why wouldn't a person just buy literally just the barrel? That would replace most of the rifling and lands and grooves and chamber marks. You could replace the extractor and ejector. That would change it. Or is it that it's such a generic version of the gun that's very commonly available since the 1980s that almost all of them have identical characteristics? And again, why not just get rid of the gun? Oh, I had the gun years ago. I sold it. To who? Oh, here's the form. Someone else has it. Just not having the gun means that another subpoena has to be given to go track it down. I'm not trying to give a manual on how to literally get away with murder, but I am explaining that you'd have to do so many fucking things wrong that it doesn't make sense. Also, the individual claimed that he was out there. Maybe he had a round in his pocket and dropped it. I'm not trying to play devil's advocate, but these are simple questions that don't have any answers right now. Now we get to the real problem. None of this information is explained outright by anybody. These are questions that are going to come up. The prosecution and the police department are doing things like not using the correct terminology for a round, saying a bullet or a cartridge when they mean something else. A date and time stamp had the wrong year, according to one person here, in some of the paperwork. Or it was just that they were re-interviewed February 2022. Is this made clear? Next, this is a case, in the Delphi case specifically, that has been going on for a long time with a data vacuum on purpose. This is a good example of why you would create a data vacuum. You wouldn't tell anybody anything. But if you're going to tell us something, tell us all of it. It's a .40 Smith & Wesson. They only say it's a .40 caliber. In their own paperwork, they said they found a gun that's being named and a .40 caliber pistol. And now they're saying it's the same one. But originally, it was indicating strongly two of them. Until we get more information, we don't know if it can be traced directly. I'm sure it's a dead bang, pun intended, example of something that could only happen from that gun, could only happen to this cartridge. Some peculiarity, like at one time he took a file to it to make the feed ramp better, and it left a very, very distinctive pattern that doesn't occur in any other gun. Or you could have followed the tutorials on YouTube that specifically tell you not to do it because it makes it harder to extract the cartridges or something. Thanks for watching. Have a good day. Good luck with that.